The laughter rolled across the lawyer's office before the sentence even ended. To my grandson, Eli, the condemned firehouse on Route 219, for the sum of $10. And Eli Carver, who had $11 and a duffel bag to his name, and nowhere to sleep that night, kept his eyes on the rolled deed sliding across the table, while the cousins who'd taken the house laughed loud enough to fill the room. What none of them thought to ask, because they were too busy laughing, was why a careful man like Earl Carver would write a careful will and then make one foolish mistake at the end of it. He had not made a mistake. The worthless building sliding toward the broke kid at the foot of the table was worth more than every dollar the rest of them had just divided up. And it would take Eli one cold week and one loose panel to learn how much. He was 19 and good with his hands in the way that never paid, the kind of boy who could bring a dead furnace back with a paperclip and patience. Right now those hands sat folded in his lap, held as still as he could hold them. The thing they were laughing at was already his. It would outlast every dollar in that room. "Read me the $10 part again," Dennis Carver said, tipping his chair back until it groaned. "I want to make sure I heard it." The lawyer did not read it again. His name was Pruitt, a tired man with reading glasses shoved up into grey hair, and the office smelled of toner and the hot dust of a radiator that ran too warm. He had read enough wills to know exactly when a family was enjoying itself. He set the pages down flat. "The estate divides as follows," Pruitt said, and his voice had the flatness of a man who wanted this over. "The house on Sycamore to Dennis Carver. The truck to Dennis Carver. The accounts, totaling $140,000, divided among Dennis Carver and his children." "Now we're talking," said Wade Carver, Dennis's oldest, grinning at his phone. "And to the grandson, Eli Carver," Pruitt went on. "The property at 14 Hartley Street, known as the Route 219 Volunteer Fire Station, condemned by the county in the amount of, and the will is specific here, $10, payable by the beneficiary." Payable by him. Dennis laughed again, slower this time, savouring it. The old man made the kid pay for the dump. "That's the funniest thing I've heard all year." He looked down the table at Eli, and something colder moved under the grin. "No hard feelings, son. Your granddad just knew who could carry a thing, and who couldn't. You know the type. The man who calls a thing fairness when it lands in his own pocket, and calls it charity when it lands in yours." Eli said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that silence cost less than anything else he owned, and he was a boy who counted costs. He looked at the rolled deed in front of him, and at the duffel bag between his sneakers. Everything he had in the world zipped inside it, and on top of the duffel where he always kept it, the dented steel thermos his grandfather had carried for 40 years. "There's the matter of payment," Pruitt said quietly, almost like an apology. "The $10. So Eli reached into his jacket and counted it out on the table in front of all of them. 5 4-1s, and the rest in quarters he stacked in 2 short towers, because his hands knew how to make small money look like less of an embarrassment. He counted it twice, not because the math changed, because Hope sometimes asked for a recount, and he had $1 left when he was done. "Keep the change," Wade said. "Oh, wait." The cousins laughed. Dennis laughed. Pruitt did not, and for one second his eyes met Eli's over the glasses, and there was something in them the boy would think about later, when he understood it. Pruitt slid the deed across. Eli signed where the man's finger pointed, his signature small and even, and then it was done. A condemned fire station for $10, and a joke. He picked up the deed before he stood. Old paper, thick and yellow, rolled and tied with a faded ribbon the colour of dried blood. And while the others were already pushing back their chairs and talking about the lake and the truck and what Dennis was going to do with the accounts, Eli unrolled an inch of it and read one line near the bottom, in the dense legal print nobody bothers with. The structure and all that lies beneath its foundation. He read it twice. It was a strange way to describe a building that was mostly a roof and a rotted floor. He did not understand it. He rolled the deed back up, tucked it inside his jacket against his ribs, and carried it and his duffel and his grandfather's thermos out of that office, while the laughter followed him down the hall like something with teeth. Outside, the fog had come down off the Greenbrier, the way it always did by late afternoon, settling into the streets of Quarry Bend until the mountains were just a darker grey behind the grey. Locals called the town the Bend, the way you give a hard place a soft name, so it goes down easier. Route 219 ran straight through the middle of it, past the boarded storefronts and the gravel lots, and the one diner that still ran a tab for men who got paid on Fridays. And Eli walked it with his collar up, $11 poorer than he'd been that morning. Which is a thing that should not be possible, and somehow was. He had nowhere to go, so he went the only place that was his now. Hartley Street sat 2 blocks off the main road, and the fire station had been closed so long, the boys who'd graffitied it had themselves grown up and moved away. The volunteer company folded the year Eli turned 12, when the county cut the budget, and the men got old and nobody young came up to take their place. Brick the colour of a bruise, 2 big bay doors, rusted shut. A smaller man door on the side with a county notice stapled to it. The orange ink faded pink by years of weather, declaring the structure unsafe for habitation. It was his. It said so against his ribs. He stood on the cracked apron out front where the engines used to roll, and for a moment he did not feel like a property owner. He felt 19 and tired in his bones, in a way that 19 is not supposed to feel. When you have nothing left, even a building you own can look like one more thing that doesn't want you. A truck slowed on the street behind him. An old Ford, primer grey, the kind that had outlived 3 paint jobs. The man inside rolled the window down halfway and looked at Eli, then up at the dead station, then back at Eli, and he did not say anything cruel. Which after the afternoon Eli had was almost enough to undo him. It was Ray Hollis. Eli knew him the way everyone in the Bend knew everyone, by face and by family. Ray had been a fire captain back when there was a company to captain, 30 years under Chief Earl Carver, and he was old now, with a white moustache gone yellow at the edges, and hands that had stopped being quick, but never stopped being sure. Ray looked at the deed-shaped bulge in the boy's jacket, and at the thermos, and his eyes stayed on the thermos a beat too long. Then he gave Eli a single slow nod, the kind men give at funerals, and put the truck back in gear, and rolled on into the fog, without a word. Eli watched the taillights disappear. He did not know yet that Ray Hollis was the only man left alive who knew what was under that floor. He just knew the nod had felt like the first decent thing anyone had handed him all day. He thought about his grandfather because the thermos in his hand made it impossible not to. After Earl's stroke, when the old chief went into the care home out on the county road and stopped being able to answer, the visits had thinned out fast. Dennis came twice and then remembered he was busy. The cousins never came at all. But every Sunday for 2 years, Eli rode the number 9 bus to the transfer station and then the number 4 out to the home. 2 buses, and the better part of 2 hours each way. And he always stopped first at the Gulf station on the corner and filled the dented thermos with coffee, black, because Earl had said all his life that no man should have to sit without coffee, and Eli was not going to let him sit without it now just because he couldn't ask. Then he would sit by the bed and read the box scores out loud. The Pirates, always, even in the losing years, which in the Bend is most of them. He read every name clean, even the hard ones the day nurses stumbled over, never tripping, because Earl had taught him that a man does a small thing right, or he does not do it at all. The old man's eyes would track him across the page. That was all. But it had been enough. It had been the only thing in Eli's life that felt like it counted. And now the man was gone, and the family had split the money and handed the boy a ruin, and a bill for $10. The fog had gone the colour of a wet nickel by the time he stopped remembering. The man door was locked, but the lock was old and the frame was older, and a boy who could resurrect a furnace with a paperclip did not have much trouble with a county padlock that had been rusting since before he could drive. He let himself in. Inside, the cold was a different kind of cold, the deep-stored cold of a building that hadn't been heated in a decade, and it smelled of dust and old motor oil, and something fainter underneath, something almost like coffee and machine grease and home, though that last part might have just been a tired boy's heart playing tricks. The apparatus bay opened in front of him, a long high room where the engines used to live, the concrete floor stained in dark ovals, where they dripped, an old brass alarm bell still bolted to the wall by the rear, with a tin panel beside it gone soft with rust. He cleared a space against the far wall, near the bell, out of the draught. He spread his jacket over the duffel for a pillow, and set the thermos beside his head where he could reach it, the way he'd set it beside a hospital bed every Sunday for 2 years. He lay there in the dark with the deed against his ribs, and that one strange line turning over in his mind. All that lies beneath its foundation. It was a fire station. There was nothing beneath it but dirt and the bones of the mountain. He would find out he was wrong about that in the morning, and being wrong would change everything. For now he closed his eyes in the cold bay of a building no one else had wanted, the only carver who'd shown up every Sunday, finally sleeping under a roof that was, against all sense and all his family, entirely his own. Morning came grey and grudging through the high row of windows, the glass so furred with a decade of grime that the light got in already worn out, the colour of dishwater. Eli woke because the cold had found the small of his back in the night and settled there and would not let go. For a moment he did not know where he was. Then he saw the long stained floor and the dark hulls of shadow where the engines used to stand. And the whole of yesterday came back at once. The office and the laughter, and the $10 counted out in 2 little towers of quarters, and the remembering lay down on his chest like a second cold on top of the first. He reached for the thermos before he was all the way awake, the way his hand had reached for it beside a hospital bed 100 Sunday mornings. The coffee inside had gone stone cold overnight. He drank it anyway, 2 swallows, because Earl Carver had said all his life that cold coffee was still coffee. And a man took what the morning handed him and did not whine about the temperature of it. It tasted like tin and like the day before. It was the best thing he owned. His breath stood up white in front of his face. He watched it a while, sitting against the duffel with the deed still tucked against his ribs, where it had stayed warm. Then, because sitting still had never once put heat in a man, he got up. He stood in the middle of the bay and turned a slow circle, and for the first time he looked at the place, not as a boy who had nowhere else to be, but as the man whose name was on the paper. That was the thing his grandfather had taught him without ever saying it out loud. You walk a dead machine before you touch it. You learn what it was before you decide what it can be. So Eli walked the building. He walked the long apparatus bay, heel to toe, counting his own steps, reading the floor the way Earl had taught him to read a furnace. The concrete was sound under the stains. The dark ovals where the trucks had dripped their oil for 40 years had soaked in so deep they were part of the stone now. The big bay doors were rusted to their tracks and would not move without a torch, but the walls that held them were true. No bow, no bulge, no long crack running where the mountain had shoved against the foundation. Whoever built this place had built it the way you build a thing you mean to outlive you. The county had stapled an orange notice to the door calling it unsafe, and the county, Eli was starting to think, had stapled that notice without ever once coming inside. In the back corner he found a workbench, the wood of it dark and oiled by old hands, and a pegboard above it where tools had hung in their painted outlines, like ghosts of themselves. Most were gone, but a few remained. A flat pry bar, a ball-peen hammer, a set of nut drivers gone orange at the tips, and Eli stood there and ran his thumb over the handle of the pry bar, and the handle had been worn smooth in the exact place a right hand would hold it. And he thought, my grandfather's hand wore that, and he had to put it down for a second and look at the wall until his eyes came back to him. That was when he noticed the bell. It was bolted to the brick at the rear of the bay, an old brass alarm bell, gone the green-brown of a penny, left in the rain, the clapper still hanging inside it patient as a tongue. He had seen it last night in the dark and thought nothing of it. Now, in the grey morning light, he saw the panel beside it. A square of tin the size of a dinner plate set flush into the brick. The kind of cover that hides a valve or a junction of wires. The rust come up through the paint until it had gone soft and brown at the edges like old bread. What made him look twice was that the brick around it did not match. All down the rear wall the mortar lines were the grey of 40 winters. Around that one tin panel, the mortar was a shade paler, a shade newer, the way a patch on a knee is always a little newer than the jeans. Somebody had opened that wall after it was built. Somebody had opened it and closed it back up and meant for it not to show, and had very nearly succeeded. Eli was a boy whose whole life had been built out of noticing the one thing that did not match. He took the pry bar down off the pegboard. He fit the flat of it into the seam at the edge of the tin, where his fingers told him the panel sat a hair proud of the brick, and he worked it the way you work, a thing you do not want to break. A little pressure, then a little more, then a little more, listening to the metal the whole time the way Earl had taught him to listen to a bolt before it stripped. The old screws holding the panel gave up their rust in soft red dust. The tin bent, then sprung, then came away in his hand with a sound like a held breath let go. Behind it was not a valve, behind it was not wires. Behind it was a hollow cut back into the wall, a square box of a space the masons had built into the brick on purpose, and hidden behind a plate of tin. And sitting in that hollow, square and patient and out of the weather was a strong box of grey steel no bigger than a loaf pan, with a hinged lid and a small folded thing resting on top of it that the dark had kept for years. Eli stood very still. Somewhere out on Route 219, a truck downshifted and faded. The building held its breath with him. He lifted the box out with both hands. It was heavier than its size, the dense, particular weight of good steel, and it was not locked. The little hasp hanging open as if whoever closed it last had wanted the next hand to find it easy. He set it on the workbench under the grey window. He picked up the folded thing that had ridden on top of it. It was an envelope. The paper had yellowed at the creases, and across the front of it, in pencil gone soft and silver with age, but in a hand Eli would have known in the pitch dark, in the slanted, careful block letters of a man who believed a thing was done right or it was not done at all, was written one word. Eli, just his name, his own name, in his grandfather's hand, waiting for him in the wall of a building the whole family had laughed at handing him. He sat down on the cold concrete with his back against the workbench because his legs told him to. For 2 years he had read to a man who could not answer. For 2 years he had filled a thermos at the Gulf station on the corner and ridden 2 buses and read the box scores clean, every hard name, into a silence that gave nothing back, and he had told himself it counted, even when nothing in his life had ever once acted like it did. And here, sealed into brick by hands that could no longer hold a pencil, was his name. Earl had written it. Earl had known. Before the stroke took his words, before the will, before the laughter, the old chief had stood at this wall and written his grandson's name and closed it up inside the only walls in the bend he trusted to keep it. Eli did not cry, or if he did, he never afterward admitted it, and there was no one in the cold bay to say otherwise. He opened the envelope with hands that had stopped being quite steady. The letter inside was 1 page, both sides, in the same pencil. He read it the way he read everything for Earl, out loud, low, his own voice strange to him in the empty bay, because it felt like the only right way to give the old man his words back. Eli, it began, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the lawyers have done their part, and you have got what is yours, which is everything that matters, and none of what they wanted. I expect they laughed. Let them. A man who laughs at a closed door has told you he never once tried the handle. I know what they think of you. I know what they think you can carry. They are wrong about you the way men are always wrong about the quiet ones, and I have arranged things so that being wrong's going to cost them, and being right is going to pay you, and there is not a court in this state can undo what I built, because I built it slow, and I built it legal, and I built it for you alone. I did not leave you a ruined son. I know it looks like one. I left you the one room nobody ever thought to open, so before you do another thing, do this, count the bays, then count them again. Eli stopped. He read that last part a second time, his brow drawn down. Count the bays, then count them again. He looked up from the page, and down the long body of the building, the way it opened in front of him in the grey morning, and he counted the bay doors set into the front wall, the way any man would count them, left to right, plain as fence posts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 bays, 5 sets of rusted tracks in the floor. 5 tall doors that the engines had rolled through when there were engines and men to ride them. He'd walked all 5 at first light. He counted them again to be sure, the way the letter told him, and got 5 again because 5 was how many there were. He set the letter down on the bench and went back into the steel box, and under a layer of waxed paper he found the rest of it. A square of folded blueprint linen gone brittle at the folds, the ink faded to the brown of weak tea. He opened it on the bench, with the care you would give a moth's wing. It was the building. His building. The architect's plan for the Hartley Street volunteer station. The date in the corner, older than his father would have been. The apparatus bay drawn out clean in a draftsman's hand with every door and every wall set down to scale. And along the front of the drawn building, where the engines rolled out, the plan showed 6 bays. Eli looked at the paper, then he looked at the wall. Then he looked at the paper again, and the cold in the building was a different cold now, the kind that climbs the back of your neck and has nothing to do with the weather. 6 on the linen, 5 in the brick. Somewhere in the body of the building he was standing in, a whole bay had gone missing, walled off and plastered over, and lost so smooth that the county men, who condemned the place, had counted 5 and written it down and driven away. A room the size of a fire engine, sealed shut, sitting inside his $10 ruin like a held breath. He picked up the heavy brass key that lay in the bottom of the box, the only thing left in it now. A key as long as his hand and green at the bow. A key for no door he had seen in the whole building. A key with no lock anywhere that he knew of. He closed his fingers around it until the cold of it stopped being cold. Then he took the brittle plan and the heavy key, and his grandfather's letter, and he went to find the wall that did not match. The plan said the building was longer than the building was. That was the first thing the numbers gave him. And numbers, Earl used to say, do not know how to lie. They only know how to get read wrong. Eli paced the inside of the bay one more time, heel to toe, counting low under his breath the way he counted strikes and balls out loud beside a hospital bed. The cold of the concrete coming up through the soles of his boots, and he fetched up against the back wall with the same count he had gotten at first light. Then he pushed the man door open and went out into the wet grey morning and paced the building along the outside, down the weedy gravel strip where the brick met the dirt, his free hand trailing the cold, slick face of it, counting the whole long way to the far corner, and the outside was longer than the inside, longer by the better part of a fire engine. He stood at the back corner with the Greenbrier fog beading cold in his hair and walked it off twice more to be sure. And twice more the brick on the outside ran on past a place where the wall on the inside had already quit. A building cannot be longer on the outside than on the in. A building that measures that way is a building with a room in it that somebody has stopped admitting to. He went back through the man door and walked the length of the bay to the north end, the blank end, the end with no door, and he stood in front of that wall and looked at it the way he had learned that morning to look at the patch behind the bell. It was brick like all the rest of it. But the mortar was the paler mortar, the newer grey, and it ran floor to ceiling in a clean tall rectangle, the exact width and the exact shape a sixth bay door would be if a sixth bay door had ever once been let to stand open there. Somebody had bricked up a doorway wide enough to roll an engine through. Somebody had done it careful, and then leaned a stack of rotted canvas hose and an old rolled tarp gone stiff as a board against the face of it, so that for 10 years not one county man with a clipboard and a condemnation form had ever once stood in this spot and wondered why a firehouse with 5 doors on the street had been drawn on the architect's linen with 6. Eli moved the hose. He moved the tarp, the dust of it rising grey in the dishwater light and catching in his throat. He set the ball-peen hammer in his right hand and the flat of the pry bar in his left. And he went at the newer mortar the way Earl had taught him to take a seized bolt, not with his temper, but with his patience, finding the soft line where the pale grey met the old grey, working the point of the bar into the seam and rapping the head of it with the hammer, a tap and a tap and a tap, until the first brick gave up its grip and turned in its bed. The second came easier. The newer mortar was the softer mortar, the way patched work always is, and a boy who had spent 2 summers helping a one-armed mason in the bend for lunch money knew exactly how soft, and he worked his way along the courses with the sweat starting under his collar, in spite of the cold, the breath standing white in front of his face, the brick dust gone to red paste on his knuckles where the skin had opened, until there was a gap in the wall, wide enough and tall enough for a thin 19-year-old to turn sideways and step through. Behind the brick it was dark, and the dark smelled different. Not the diesel and dust of the bay. Cooler, drier, mineral, the way the inside of a well smells. He put his phone up with the light on. The screen cracked corner to corner, and the battery down in the red. And the little light shook because his hand was shaking, and it showed him not the street side of a 6th truck bay, but a small closed room no wider than a hall, the front of it bricked solid against Hartley Street the same as the back, sealed at both ends like a held breath inside the body of the building. There was no engine in it. There never had been. There was only the floor, and set down into the floor was a plate of steel, the size of a cellar door, hinged on one edge, with a recessed ring at the other, and a heavy old lock fitted through a steel hasp. The lock the green-black of brass left 40 years in the dark. He knew before he tried it. He took the long brass key out of his jacket, the key as long as his hand, the key that had fit no door in the whole building, and he knelt on the cold steel and fit it into the lock, and it slid home like it had been cut that morning, and oiled that morning, and was only waiting on the one hand the old man had cut it for. He turned it. The bolt let go with a sound he felt in his teeth more than heard. He hooked 2 fingers in the ring and pulled, and the steel plate came up on its hinge slow and heavy, and under it a stair went down into the black, concrete steps poured straight and true, descending into the ground beneath the apparatus floor. into a cold that came up out of the dark to meet him smelling of stone and old paper, and faint and impossible, and breaking his heart clean in two, of coffee. He went down. He counted the steps without meaning to, the way he counted everything. And at the 11th step his light found the bottom, and his light found the room. It was a vault. There was no other word a man could put on it. A room dug out and poured in concrete beneath the firehouse, dry as a Bible, the walls smooth and grey and sound, lined down both sides with steel shelving. And on the shelving stood rows of grey steel boxes with hinged lids, and a long flat case, and at the far end on its own shelf set square in the centre, the way a man sets down a thing that matters more than the rest. A coffee tin. Eli stood at the foot of the stair with his cracked light shaking over all of it, and could not for a moment make his legs go any farther. Then he opened the first box. Inside it, banded in paper bands gone the colour of weak tea, were certificates. Heavy paper engraved, scrolled at the corners, printed with the seal of the county and the seal of the state, each one a bond payable to the bearer, each one a sum. And there were stacks of them, and there were more boxes. And Eli, who had never in his life held more than $11 at one time, and was holding $11 that very morning folded in his back pocket, did not yet have any idea what he was looking at, only that it was old and it was careful, and it had been kept the way you keep a thing you mean to last. The long flat case held a single rolled document tied with a faded ribbon, and he did not untie it yet. And the tin, when he came at last to the tin, and lifted it down with both hands the way he lifted his grandfather's thermos, had a strip of tape across the lid, and on the tape, in the slanted, careful pencil block letters, he would have known at the bottom of the sea were the two words. For Eli. He sat down on the cold concrete floor of his grandfather's vault with the tin in his lap and his back against the steel shelving, and he turned his light off to save what was left of it, and he sat in the full dark a while, because some things a man can only let himself feel where there is no light to see his face by. When he turned the light back on, it fell, by chance, on the foot of the wall beside the stair, where the concrete had been poured into its forms all those years ago, and left to cure. And there, pressed into the grey while it was still wet, with the end of a nail or the tip of a finger, before it set up hard as the mountain and held the mark forever, was a single word scratched into the foundation of the room. A name. Hollis. Eli was still looking at that name, turning it over, a name that was not Carver in a room that was nothing but Carver. When the voice came down the stair. "Earl," the voice said, rough and old and careful, stopping on the word like a man stepping onto ice. "Earl, is that you down there?" A flashlight beam, a real one, strong and yellow, came feeling down the steps ahead of the boots, and behind it, down the stair came a man near 70, broad gone to stooped, a grey moustache and a grey canvas coat and a face that had been out in 30 winters of weather. And when that beam found Eli sitting on the floor with the tin in his lap, the old man stopped 3 steps from the bottom and put his free hand flat against the concrete wall, as if the room had tilted under him. "You're not Earl," the old man said. "No, sir," Eli said. "Earl was my grandfather. I'm Eli, Eli Carver." The flashlight came down the rest of the way. The old man crossed the floor slow and lowered himself onto the bottom step, with a grunt and a hand on his knee. And he looked at the boy, and he looked at the open boxes, and he looked at the tin, and his eyes when they came back to Eli were wet and bright in the crosslight. "Ray Hollis," he said. "Captain, engine company, 30 years. I rode the line under your grandfather longer than you've been breathing." He nodded at the name scratched in the wall, and his voice when it came out had gone down to almost nothing. "And that's my name down there in the floor, son, because I am the only living soul Earl Carver ever let help him build this room, the only one he ever told." Eli looked at the boxes, then back at the old captain. "Told what? What is all this? What is this paper?" Ray Hollis reached out and took one of the certificates up off the top of the open box, and he held it under his light, and his thumb went over the engraving the way Eli's thumb had gone over the worn handle of the pre-bar, slow, like touching something asleep. "This," Ray said, "is the Fireman's Relief Fund. Or it's what your grandfather made of it. Town let the volunteer company die, Eli. Cut us down a little every budget year till there wasn't enough to crank an engine. And when they folded us, they swept what was left of the relief fund into the general account and called it found money. He set the bond down gentle. Earl never could abide that. So he bought this dead building off the county for a song, and he came down here on his off hours for the better part of 20 years. and he put it back, bond by bond, out of his own pocket and his own pension. He preserved it. He'd say that word like it was scripture. Preserved. Out of his own pocket, Eli said. Why? Why would a man spend 20 years paying back a fund nobody even remembered? And here the old captain went quiet, and the quiet went on long enough that the cold came up through the concrete into both of them. And when Ray Hollis spoke again, he did not look at the boy. He looked at the name in the wall. You don't know, he said. Lord, he never told you. Of course he never told you. He drew a long breath that shook coming in. There was a fire, Eli. Long time back now. You'd have been near 3 years old. Bad night. Ice on the grade, and we were a man short, and the second engine was down for a part the town wouldn't pay for. And by the time we got up the mountain to that house, there wasn't a thing left in the world that 30 years of training could do. He stopped. He pressed his lips together hard under the grey moustache. Your mother and your father were in that house, son. That's the fire. That's the one. Eli did not move. Somewhere far above them on Route 219, a truck changed down through its gears and was gone, and the vault held the two of them in its stone quiet. Earl was chief that night, Ray went on, low. He'd stood up in front of the town council 6 times begging for the money to keep that second engine running, and 6 times they smiled and voted it down, and then it was his own boy's house on the grade, and there was nothing. He never said a public word against a soul. He just decided he owed it. Decided the town had a debt it would never pay, and he would carry it for them. Every dollar that fund should have had, and didn't. So that one day, the one who got left behind would never want for a thing. The old captain finally turned his light on the boy, gentle, off to the side so as not to blind him. That's you, Eli. He carried it 20 years for you. The whole time you thought there wasn't anybody. He was down here in the dark building you a floor to stand on. And in that long moment, while a homeless boy sat on the floor of a vault, his dead grandfather had spent 2 decades filling for him, on the far side of the bend, in a county where word travels slower than fog. Dennis Carver was sitting at a closing table, with a pen in his hand, and a Lakeview brochure at his elbow, laughing easy with a man from a development company, certain to the bottom of his shoes that the only thing standing on Hartley Street was 5 empty bays of condemned brick waiting on the wrecking ball. And worth, the both of them agreed, precisely nothing at all. He worked the edge of the tape up with his thumbnail and lifted the lid, and the coffee smell rose up stronger out of the dark of the tin, and there at the bottom was the reason for it. Plain. A small paper sack of ground coffee gone to oil, and dust with the years, set down there by a man who could not abide the notion of his boy coming into a cold stone room with nothing warm in it anywhere. On top of the sack lay a single folded sheet, and on the sheet was the handwriting, and Eli did not need the old captain to tell him whose. He had watched that same hand keep a scorebook steady in a care home day room for 2 whole years after it had given up nearly everything else it used to do. He read it once to himself in the shaking light, his lips moving, and no sound coming. Then, because the man who wrote it had ridden 30 winters of fire under the grey-moustached captain sitting there on the bottom step, turning his hat slow in his 2 hands, Eli read it again out loud, and his voice only went out from under him the one time, near the end. Eli, if you are down in this room reading this, then you walked the building, and you counted it, and you believed the figure, over the men who told you different, and that is the whole of the only thing I ever set out to teach you, so I will not spend good paper teaching it to you twice. You will think the $10 was the joke they all took it for. It was not. A thing a man gives away, some other man can stand up in a courthouse and call a mistake, or a weak moment, or the wandering of an old mind near the end of its rope. A thing a man sells for hard money laid down on a table and wrote into the county's own book, in the county's own ink. There is not a soul, drawing breath, who can ever pull it back out of your 2 hands. I did not leave you this place, son. I sold it to you, cheap and clean, and recorded. And the $10 is the lock on the door. It is not the price of the house. Dennis will come. He always did come, the minute there was money in a room he could smell and could not see. Let him come. Don't you raise your voice at him, and don't you argue him so much as a word. The long flat case holds the paper. You carry it in, you set it down in front of the judge, and you step back, and you fold your hands. Let the paper say the thing I taught it how to say. I know what they let you turn into out there while I sat in a chair I could not get up out of to stop them. I know about the Sundays. I couldn't answer you, but I heard every score you read me off that page, and I sat the whole week through waiting on the sound of your shoes coming up that hall, the way a man waits on the one clean thing left to him. You never missed it. Not the one time, after every other one of them had quit the road and forgot the way. So I dug a room under the ground for the boy who kept on coming. Go on up the stairs now and leave the dark down here to me. The light up top was always going to be yours. Eli folded the sheet along the creases the old man's thumbs had pressed into it and put it inside his jacket against his chest. For a while neither of them said a thing. Then Ray Hollis cleared his throat rough and reached over and drew the long, flat case onto his knees and untied the ribbon, gone soft and colourless as a moth's wing, and slid the rolled document out and spread it open under the two lights. It was a deed, and stamped across the face of it in faded purple, ringed round with the county recorder's seal, and a date set down 19 years gone, was the proof that it was not only signed, but recorded, filed, walked into the courthouse by Earl Carver himself in a year, when Eli was barely big enough to climb a porch step, and entered into the permanent book where the county keeps its given word. Ray's blunt finger went down the lines slow, the way a man reads aloud to a child, and he found the part and he read it twice to be sure his old eyes had it true. Conveyed, he read, the structure standing at the corner of Hartley Street, together with the lot and all that lies beneath its foundation. He looked up, all that lies beneath its foundation. He wrote the vault into the deed, Eli, near 20 years before you'd ever set foot down here. He didn't just dig you a room, he put the room into the law where it'd outlast every last one of them. He let the paper roll back gentle on itself. And there's the rest of the block in the same deed besides. Every empty lot Ridgeline's been sniffing at down this street. All of it his, all of it on the book, all of it yours, now down to the last weed in the gravel. How much? Eli said. He nodded at the steel shelves, the banded paper, the grey boxes standing in their rows. All of it. How much is all of it? The old captain was a long time answering. He set his hand flat on the nearest box, the way a man lays a hand on a coffin. I helped him count it the once, the winter before they took him into the home, he said. Bonds and the block both, 2 million and better, 2,000,004, near as the two of us could ever make it come out. He shook his head slow. Your uncle fought tooth and claw at the table for a house and a truck and 140,000 in the bank, and called this building junk for the dozer, and laughed, and the junk had 4 times the whole of it sitting under the floor, in the dark. Word travels slow up Route 219, slow as the fog comes off the Greenbrier of a morning, but it travels, and it found Dennis Carver inside the month. It found him by way of a Ridgeline man knocking on a door 3 lots up Hartley Street, and being told, polite, that the door and the lot both already had an owner, a young one, name of Carver. Eli. And what Dennis Carver understood in the half-second after he heard that name was not that his nephew had landed soft. What he understood was that the lake lot he had already put the house money down on was a lot he could not carry one more season, that the bank paper he had signed against the home place was paper that came due, and that the only road left out from under all of it ran straight through voiding a $10 sale. He had laughed himself sick over in a lawyer's office not 6 months back, so he hired a man and he filed, and he asked the county to throw the sale out as a sham, and a fraud worked on a sick old mind, and he asked them to reopen the whole estate so it could be carved again, properly this time. And the date was set in the county courthouse on a Tuesday in the grey end of winter. They were all there. The cousins who had taken the house came in their good coats and sat in a row, and Dennis came in a tie with a lawyer at his elbow who had a soft leather folder and a soft, confident way of laying his hands on it. And somewhere behind them in the back row sat a man from Ridgeline with a folder of his own, there to see was there anything left of this block worth the buying. When the cousins saw Eli come in, they leaned and murmured among themselves, and one of them near smiled, the way they had all smiled before, the boy in the borrowed jacket, too big through the shoulders, with nobody in the world behind him, but a stooped old fireman in a clean flannel shirt. Eli carried one thing, a cardboard tube, the kind a man keeps a drawing in, held in both hands across his front, like something that might spill. Dennis's lawyer talked for a good while. He said $10 was no price and no consideration and no sale at all, that you could not buy a building for the cost of a sandwich, that a confused old man near the end had been led to give away what his rightful family ought to have, and that the only just remedy was to set the whole thing aside and open the estate back up and divide it true. He used the word fraud more than the once. Dennis sat with his arms folded and the look of a man already counting money. When the lawyer sat down, the judge, an unhurried grey woman who had heard a great many men explain why the paper should not mean what the paper said, turned her glasses toward the back table and asked the young man if he cared to respond. Eli stood. He did not say one word. He walked up to the table at the front, and he uncapped the tube and slid the rolled deed out, and laid it down flat and turned it so it faced the bench. And he set his finger on the line, and he stepped back the way the letter had told him to, and he folded his hands. The judge read it to herself. Then she read the recorded line out into the quiet room, the corner of Hartley Street and all that lies beneath its foundation. And she read the recorder's stamp and the date 19 years gone. And she set her glasses down on the paper. "This isn't a gift, counsellor," she said. "Your client keeps saying gift. A gift, you'd have an argument. This is a recorded sale for stated consideration, filed in this building before your client's father ever took sick, before the boy was old enough to read. $10 is consideration. The law has never once cared whether it was a fair price, only whether it was a real one, and a real one paid hand to hand and entered on the book 19 years back. It's about the soundest thing a person can own in this state." She let that sit. The motion to void the conveyance is denied. The station and the block stay where they are. Dennis was halfway up out of his chair. "Then reopen the estate," his lawyer said quick. "As we asked, Your Honour, the value's been misstated, the inventory's wrong, there's assets unaccounted. We asked the court reopen probate this day." And the judge looked at him a moment and looked at the rolled paper, and something moved behind her eyes that was very close to mercy and decided against it. "On that," she said, "you'll get exactly what you asked me for, counsellor. I am reopening the estate." She drew a single sheet towards her. "And since we're reopening it, the court will have a fresh and full inventory of every estate asset, beginning with the home place, which I'm told carries a bank lien recorded by your client some 4 months after the decedent passed and the original probate closed. The court will want to know how an estate asset came to be pledged by an heir and where the proceeds went." She looked over the top of her glasses, not unkindly, at Dennis Carver standing white-faced at his table. "Sit down, sir. You open this door. You don't get to choose which way the cold comes through it." In the back of the room, the man from Ridgeline closed his folder without a sound, and stood, and went out the doors, and did not come back, because there is no buying a block from a man who does not own it, and no lending against a lake lot to a man whose only collateral was about to be inventoried out from under him on the public record. The cousins in their good coats had gone very still. Dennis sat down hard. Whatever he had carried into that room, he carried back out a great deal lighter, and Eli, rolling the deed back into its tube at the front table, never once looked over at him, because the letter folded against his chest had told him he would not need to, and the letter, like the paper, had been right. He gave the diner on the corner its tab back, the one that had carried him through the worst of the cold, paid it in full, and left the woman behind the counter, blinking after him. After that, he let the bonds do quietly what bonds do, in an office in the county seat with men who knew how, and he kept exactly enough back to do the one thing he had decided on the floor of the vault in the dark. Come the next hard freeze, there was a new sign bolted over the 5 doors on Hartley Street, painted plain so a body could read it from the road. The Earl Carver Warming House, and under the sign the bay that had stood cold and boarded 10 winters running stood open and warm, cots along the brick where the engines used to wait, a urn of coffee going day and night on a long table near the old patched place behind the bell. On the first true cold night, a boy came up out of the dark of Route 219 with a duffel on his shoulder and nowhere on this earth to be, the way Eli had come, and the door was not locked against him, and nobody at all laughed, and a young man with a too big jacket and a dented thermos in his hand got up and poured him a cup before he was even all the way through the door. That winter the windows on Hartley Street burned yellow past midnight, and the door stood unlocked. Inside, a boy nobody had wanted poured coffee for one who had nowhere else to go,